class. Okay. So the history of comparative literature, okay, and that we see that so in previous 2 or 3 classes we have learned that the comparative literature starts from the reaction of cultural heritage, and and previously we have learned the influence of the French and the German origin of comparative literatures. And this cultural heritage create tremendous effect in European perspectives, because from the uh, first half of the 20th century, the Europe was in a revolution. Every country were getting uh, freedom from the other country, and they are trying to put their cultural identity. সবাই স্বাধীনতা লাভ করছে এবং সবাই তাদের নিজের সাহিত্য এবং সংস্কৃতির যে রূপ সেটা খুঁজে বের করার চেষ্টা করছে। Not all emerging nations invented their own non-existent medieval literature, but it is significant that a key text which caught the public imagination. So in this, every country of Europe was trying to get their cultural roots, but all are not getting such kind of roots. Only one exception, that is the James Macpherson Fingal, which appeared in 1762. Okay. And this tradition, the heading to the past tradition and the cultural time, next time translated in many languages through in forgery, inspired nationalism on Europe. Okay. So when all countries or maximum countries of Europe were trying to get their cultural root, at that time, this Macpherson's Fingal is an example. How? Because this Macpherson's Fingal inspired nationalism. In which way? That is, this Macpherson is a Scottish poet and writer. Okay, and literary collection. Okay, so he is known as the translator of the Ocean Circle of the epic poems, a first Scottish poet to gain at international reputation. So what happened to that? So all European countries were trying to get their cultural root. James Macpherson came forward, and he is the Scottish writer. And Macpherson claimed that his poem, that means his poem, his poem Fingal, his poem Fingal was translated of a galley epic written of Irish bird Ocean. We know UK is comprised with Ireland, England, Wales, and Scotland. Okay, so Macpherson said that this galley epic, I have translated this poem. Which poem? That is the Fingal. She said that I have translated this Fingal poem from the Gaelic epic. That is the Irish tradition. What does it mean? That means Ireland had a literary past. Ireland had a great literary past, and that was inspired the writing such kind of important poem in Fingal by James Macpherson. So this Fingal is an example of such ancient epic poem translated by James Macpherson. So Macpherson translated Fingal, and he claimed that he translated Fingal from the Gaelic epic tradition. And Gaelic is the cultural root of Ireland, not England, not Wales, or not Scotland. Okay. So Macpherson also produced a collection of poetry collected in the highlands of the Scotland, but his ocean version surpassed everything else he produced. So his Fingal, Macpherson, this Scottish poet, wrote many poems regarding the Highlands of Scotland, Scotland, okay? The Harry Potter and the other series that was produced in Scotland, okay? The Highlands. Okay, so the Highland is a significant part of Scotland, and based on the Highlands, Macpherson wrote many poems, but he admitted that, and it is claimed that Fingal is one of his good and the best creation, that Fingal put Macpherson in the category of one of the best poets of Ireland and even in the UK. And this is Ireland's national animal, Scotland's national animal, that is the unicorn. This is an imaginary animal. Okay. So Frederick Loney described Ocean later as a short history of the comparative literature from the earliest times to the present day, as a northern Dante, yeah, as a great majesty. Okay. So this Ocean version, Fingal, Frederick Lolly, he claimed that it is a significant effect of um, uh, comparative literature, the publication of Fingal. Ocean subject matter combined romance, heroism, accounts of mythical lands, and savage lyricism, probably derived from the folk version of the Ocean poems. Okay. So the Ocean, Macpherson had a good knowledge of ancient Gaelic poetry to produce his forgeries. Okay. Actually, this Macpherson that is claimed that it is a forgery. Okay, it is claimed by the English poet. Okay, so Ocean means that is the Gaelic legend, a legendary hero poet of the Ireland basis. Okay, so Ocean related to Ireland's origin. Okay, so this Ocean. So scholars discuss the impact of Macpherson work on French, Italian, Polish, and Czech literary systems. What do you think? We think that whenever Fingal by Macpherson was produced in Scotland, that creates an indication that Ireland had a great literary past. And inspired by such kind of inspiration, France, Italy, Poland, and Czech, they were trying to find their cultural roots. Whether there is any important literary production of these countries, they were trying heavily that they want to put. যেমন আয়ারল্যান্ড এইরকম একটা অরিজিন পেয়েছে, যে ওশিয়ান অরিজিন আয়ারল্যান্ডের যে বার্ড দ্বারা 1762 সালে এটা লেখা হয়েছে, এরকম যে তাদের একটা গ্রেট লিটারারি অতীত আছে, কালচারাল অতীত আছে, এবং এটা আমরা আগেও জেনেছি that there is a linkage of literature and culture. So Ireland's literary tradition was related to cultural tradition, and that was the Ireland's past and cultural heritage, and that inspiration inspired this country to find out their own cultural heritage. French, Italy, Polish, Poland, and Czech. Macpherson was included on the curriculum of the English department in many parts of this world, okay, ranking equally with Byron as a fundamental author of the late 18th and the early 19th centuries. But Macpherson was denied in England. And in England, Macpherson was put a mere footnote in many English literature and the English-speaking world. Why? 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 That means when Macpherson was liked by France, Italy, Poland, and Czech, but Macpherson is not liked by England and other speaking English-speaking world. Why? Because Macpherson, there was a because Macpherson work is a great in different literary scene and political literary of his age, cannot deny it on the other. But Johnson accused Macpherson of forgery from the beginning. Johnson, English poet, he said that Macpherson did it forgery. But it is not the fact that this forgery that Macpherson is not taught in Britain. So এই জন্যই কি ব্রিটেনে বা ইংল্যান্ডে ম্যাকফারসনকে পড়ানো হয় না, একটা ফুটনোট হিসেবে ব্যবহার করা হয়েছে? নো, দ্যাট ইজ নট এক্স্যাক্টলি দ্য রিজন। As his forgery had no impact in Italy and Poland. So যদি তার ফরজারির কারণ হতো ইটালি, পোল্যান্ড এবং ফ্রান্সে, তার লেখার উপরে যে প্রতিক্রিয়া তৈরি করেছিল সেটা কোনো প্রতিক্রিয়া ব্যাঘাত ঘটাতে পারে নাই, তাহলে ইংল্যান্ডে কেন এই প্রতিক্রিয়া ব্যবহার করতে পারে? ইজ দিস দ্য অনলি রিজন that Johnson claimed forgery against Macpherson? No. But Macpherson's success or failure was dependent on his text role in the haughty European debate of national culture and national identity. So that means England thought that Scotland and Ireland got their rich cultural and literary heritage, and we have failed that. with that ego, with that nationalistic or excessive nationalistic perspectives, Macpherson was not taught in Britain. Okay. So in Britain, Scottish and Irish nationalism were feared and despised, and there was a vested interest in the denying the possibility of a great literary and the poetic past to both Scottish and Ireland. Okay, so there was a tendency of competition among Britain, Scotland, and Ireland. So Britain in no way were in a position to admit that Scotland and Ireland will have great literary tradition. And for this reason, Macpherson was denied in England. In other nations like French, Italy, and Poland, they tried to establish their national identity by rediscovering the past, and they did it by translating the best literature of other nations. So why? So French, Italy, and Poland, they were trying to get their literary tradition by translating the other literature. And Macpherson is taught in Italy, France, and Poland, but not in Britain. Okay, so that was indicated by Susan Bassett. Okay, so in literature, in comparative literature, of course, there is a national heritage or national egoistic perspectives. Okay, and that can call the imperial perspectives. Imperial perspectives of comparative literature. What is that? That is the imperialism indicates that a powerful nation will be dominating less powerful nation by force. Okay, that is the imperialism. And what is the cultural imperialism? What is the literary imperialism? Literary imperialism, cultural imperialism is that our culture is best. Europe's culture is best. England's culture is best. So culturally, if a country wants to dominate other countries' culture or nation's culture, that is called cultural imperialism. And in comparative literature, literary imperialism will be there. What is the literary imperialism? That means our literature, that means the creative writing, poetry, novel, fiction, other genre of literature are great and the greatest among all nations. That is called, this attitude called cultural imperialism. So this scenario, the cultural imperialism, that picture changed radically when we turn to consider the way in which Europe was projecting itself on the rest of the world. So Europe, every country, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, England, of course, they were trying to portray that our literature, culture, our politics, everything are greater and the greatest in this world, greater than any nations and the greatest among all these countries. Okay, so that was a position, but American Revolution or 1776 had a say on the native England of the colonists off along a new road. And in the early 19th century, the revolution of Latin America were to follow a similar process of ruptures with Spain. Okay, so America got independence in 1776, and after that, England got isolated. And at that time, and in case of the Latin America, they were trying to make a separation from the Spain. What was that? Why? এই কারণগুলো কেন করছে? আমেরিকার স্বাধীনতা লাভের পরে ব্রিটেন যেমন আমেরিকা থেকে চলে আসলো, ওকে, আমেরিকা নিজস্ব একটা দেশ পেল, তাদের নিজস্ব সংস্কৃতি পেল, নিজস্ব কালচার পেল, এবং তার সাথে সাথে তারা স্পেনকেও আলাদা করে নিল। ওকে, দ্যাট মিনস ল্যাটিন আমেরিকান and American people, they said that we have our cultural heritage. That is the American culture, American literature, American nationhood. Okay, everything that was published. And the New England, for the most of her English, because her poems were published in England, they are not being, there is an example over here. Just like Macpherson, there is an example in America. The vexed question as to whether an author like Anne Bradstreet could be considered an American or English. Because এরকম একজন রাইটার আমরা পাচ্ছি, তার নাম হলো অ্যান ব্র্যাডস্টিট। ইনি আমেরিকাতে বাস করতেন। হি হ্যাড বিন লিভিং ইন আমেরিকা, কিন্তু তার সমস্ত লেখা, সে সময় আমেরিকা তো প্রকাশ করার স্বাধীনতা ছিল না, সে সমস্ত লেখাগুলো প্রকাশ হয়েছে ইংল্যান্ডে। মোস্ট অফ হিজ পাবলিকেশন was published in England. So what we will call Anne Bradstreet as the American writer or the British writer? That was a question. Okay, because and American or English, because her poems are published in England, they are not being facilities available in the colonies, that means in America, could finally be resolved. American literature may have taken English literature as models, but American writers were developing separately. Okay, in terms of means of production as well as subject matter and forms. Likewise, okay, so American literature can also be called English literature. Okay, but English literature can be called the literature produced in England. Okay, so English literature cannot be called American literature. American literature will have a different characteristics that was developed, formed, and originated in America. তাহলে যদি অ্যান ব্র্যাডস্টিট উনি আমেরিকাতে বসে সাহিত্য রচনা করেছেন, কবিতা রচনা করেছেন, এই কবিতাগুলোর কনটেক্সট, থিম, সমস্ত কিছু পার্সপেক্টিভস কিন্তু সেই নিউ ইংল্যান্ড এবং আমেরিকা, কিন্তু সেগুলো প্রকাশ হয়েছে ইংল্যান্ডে। তার মানে কি আমরা এই অ্যান ব্র্যাডস্টিটকে বলবো যে ইংলিশ পয়েট, না বলবো হচ্ছে আমেরিকান পয়েট? ওকে, এখানে বলা হচ্ছে কিন্তু it is claimed that no, and Bradstreet also wrote his writing in America. So America was developed. Latin American writers endeavoring to create an epic fit for a new continent is still caught up in the coils of the publishing policy, censorship, stylistic constraints, and a host of other legacies from Spain and Portugal, but nevertheless seeing revolutionary struggle as linked to the emergence of new literatures. Okay, so America, their style, their constraint, their censorship, everything, the American writer, especially the Latin American writers, they were trying to find out their own tradition. And that is the tradition. That tradition came from the imperial perspectives. That means they say that the English people say, the British say that our literature is great. So challenging such kind of attitude, British American writer, especially the Latin American writer, were getting separation from Spanish, Portugal's literature, as well as from the English literature in form and theme. So that is the most prominent of the early English poets of North America, the first writer in England's North America colonies to be published. She is the first Puritan figure in American literature and notable for her large corpus of poetry as well as personal writings published posthumously. Okay, so that is Anne. So literary developments in New World reflected a new order in complete contrast in the attitudes of the colonial power to the literary production by peoples under the domination. Probably the most extreme example of this Philistine version of the famous, in parentheses, infamous comment by Macaulay, who in 1835 stated that that is an example of the literary imperialism. The British Secretariat acquired historian and ethicist Macaulay in 1835 comment that I have never found one among them, that means Orientalist, who could deny that a single shelf of good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. These people, Macaulay, Thomas Babington Macaulay, a British historian, Whig politician, wrote extremely as an essayist and contemporary and the historical socio-political subject as a reviewer. This gentleman, এই gentleman বললো যে একজন এশিয়ান এবং আরাবিয়ানরাও আমার কাছে অস্বীকার করবেন না। তার মানে কি? দ্যাট ইজ কল্ড, যেটাকে বলা হয় ডিরেক্টেড, মানে সবাই আমার সাথে স্বীকার করবেন। সেই কমেন্টটা কি? যে ইউরোপিয়ান যে লাইব্রেরি গুলো আছে, এই লাইব্রেরির একটা সেলফে যে পরিমাণ লেখা আছে, বই আছে, এর মূল্য সমস্ত ইন্ডিয়া আরাবিয়াতে যত লিটারেচার আছে তাদের লিটারেচারের থেকে সবচেয়ে বেশি কি আমাদের ইউরোপে যে কোনো জায়গার একটা লাইব্রেরিরও পুরো না, একটা লাইব্রেরির একটা সেলফের সাথে। ওকে, দ্যাট ইজ দ্য সিঙ্গেল শেলফ of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. That is the extreme imperial perspectives in literature that was placed by Macaulay. I have certainly never met with any Orientalist who ventured to maintain that the Arabic and the Sanskrit poetry could be compared to that of great European nations. And next time he said that yes, Sanskrit poetry and Arabic literature, Sanskrit, we have said Ramayana, Mahabharata, and also the Arabic literature. Okay? Uh, uh, so he said that this cannot be. The Sanskrit poetry and the Arabic literature cannot be compared with great European nations. That was Macaulay's comment. So, let Macaulay's attack on the cultural heritage of the Middle East and the Indian subcontinent strikes us today as both racist and absurd. Some will say that Macaulay's comment is very absurd. Others will say he is a racist because he loves his race very much. Yet, the underlying assumption of Macaulay's position were widely shared. Okay, that means his position, Macaulay's position, was shared by many people living in Europe and Asia and Africa and Arabia. Okay. So that position was shared by many people at the time. Okay. And this another example can be given over there. Okay, Edward Fitzgerald, whose translation of Rubaiyat-e-Umar Khayyam became one of the greatest classic examples of the 19th century, who also had a low opinion of Oriental literature. It is an amusement to me. He wrote to his friend Cornwell and Marsh. Okay. Macaulay বলল যে হচ্ছে ইউরোপিয়ান একটা লাইব্রেরির একটা শেলফের সাথে অ্যারাবিয়ান এবং এশিয়ান সমস্ত সাহিত্যকে তুলনা করা যেতে পারে, কিন্তু এরপরে এই অ্যারাবিক একটা সাহিত্য যেটা রুবায়াতে উমর খৈয়াম, এটা ট্রান্সলেশন করলেন এডওয়ার্ড ফিtzgerald, এবং এই ট্রান্সলেশন করার ফলে এই ফিtzgeraldের অনেক বেশি ইংলিশ পোয়েট এন্ড রাইটার, হিজ মোস্ট ফেমাস পোয়েম is the first and the best known English translation of the Rubaiyat-e-Umar Khayyam, which has kept its reputation and the popularity since the 1860 decades. Okay, that is Fitzgerald. So Fitzgerald, he wrote this. Okay, and for the translation of Rubaiyat-e-Umar Khayyam, this poet, that is Fitzgerald, got reputation. কিন্তু তিনি আবার বলছে যে উনি এখানে রুবায়াতে উমর খৈয়াম এটাতে ইংরেজিতে ট্রান্সলেশন করে উনি খ্যাতি লাভ করলেন, কিন্তু তারও এই অ্যারাবিক সাহিত্যের প্রতি, ওরিয়েন্টাল লিটারেচারের প্রতি ভালো একটা ধারণা ছিল না। উনি বললেন, তার একটা বন্ধুকে উনি চিঠি লিখেছিলেন মার্চের 20 তারিখে 1857 সালে, to take all liberties I like with this Persian, who, as I think, are not poets enough to frighten one from such excursion, who really do want a little art to shape them. Okay, এই পার্সিয়ান কবিকে ট্রান্সলেট করেই উনি কবির জগতের নাম প্রকাশ করলেন, কিন্তু তার বন্ধুকে লিখছে যে এই পার্সিয়ানরা তারা আসলে লিখেছে কবিতা, বাট এটা লিটারেরি আর্ট হিসেবে খুব একটা সমৃদ্ধ না। Okay, so just like Macaulay, Fitzgerald also had a low opinion about the literature of Asia, Persia, and Arabia. Okay, belief in the superiority of their own culture was a part of the politics of imperialism. The rhetoric, the narrative they have developed, that means the European narrative they developed, is that who is dismissed African and the Asian peoples as primitive and childlike, who dismissed their art forms in various ways. So the European narrative was that the Asian are primitive, they are the childlike. Okay, so they are childlike people, can't produce a rich literature. Okay, so they denied the existence of rich literary tradition of Europe and Africa. Oral culture was generally regarded as being of lower status. So the existence of the tradition of oral epics, for example, was considered insignificant. They said, আরো একটা বললো যে সংস্কৃতে যে কবিতাগুলো লেখা হয়েছে, রামায়ণ, মহাভারত, এগুলো বলছে এগুলো ওরাল ট্রেডিশন। এই ওরাল ট্রেডিশন কখনো ভালো সাহিত্য কর্ম হতে পারে না। দ্যাট ইজ অ্যানাদার ভিউ অফ দ্য ইউরোপিয়ান পিপল, দ্যাট ইজ অ্যানাদার ইউরোপিয়ান রেটরিক, দ্যাট ইজ অ্যানাদার ইউরোপিয়ান ন্যারেটিভ। ওকে, মানলাম। At the same time, because of the importance of the written epic of the European tradition, those cultures which had no epic, which uh, which saw the lyric as the highest form of poetry, were also downgraded. Homer and the Greek, Homer and the Greeks, the plays of Shakespeare, the poetry of Spenser and Milton, these were the texts against which other works were measured and found wanting. Okay, so they said that the European Asian tradition, they are the oral tradition, and their lyrical poetry that is not good enough in relation to the writings of Homer, Shakespeare, Milton. Okay, so they said that their literature is silent. Okay, but Omar Khayyam, we are no other than a morning road, a magic shadow ships that come and go. That is Oam Khayyam quote. So Oam Khayyam's, that is Rubaiyat Oam Khayyam, the first four lines of this: awake for morning in the bowl of night, and clang the stone that puts the stars to fight, or lo, the hunter of the eastern earth. Yes, that means Rubaiyat Umar Khayyam is a collection of quatrains. এই কবিতাটা রুবায়াতে ওমর খৈয়াম যেটা যিনি লিখেছিলেন, এই ওমর খৈয়াম পার্সিয়ান কবি, সেগুলো হচ্ছে 4 লাইনের একটা করে কবিতা। ইজ আ কালেকশন অফ 4 lines poems attributed to the Persian polymath Omar Khayyam. While Khayyam was renowned in his lifetime for his contribution to the mathematics and astrology and others. Okay, that is Robert Khayyam. That was translated by uh, Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald. Okay, so but they claim that is their literature is not gold. Okay, and so in such a denied position in African European narratives, Jawaharlal Nehru drew an ironic contrast between what he called the two Englands. When such kind of debate or narrative, European যেরকম একটা narrative চলতেছে, একটা debate চলতেছে, একটা rhetoric চলতেছে, যে তাদের সাহিত্য আমাদের সাহিত্যের থেকে, এশিয়ান আফ্রিকান সাহিত্যের থেকে অনেক উন্নত, তখন এই জওহরলাল নেহরু, রাইটার অ্যান্ড পলিটিশিয়ানস, একটা কন্ট্রাস্টিভ কমপ্লেট করলেন। কি করলেন? Which of these two Englands came to India? He said that England has two perspectives. The Shakespeare that was taken to India was a writer who has depicted as being an embodiment of English virtue and virtuosity. Shakespeare, the great master, Shakespeare, the supreme English writer, Shakespeare, the epitome of Englishness, was what came to be exported. Jawaharlal Nehru বললেন যে হলো শেক্সপিয়ারকে একদিক থেকে দেখছি একটা গ্রেট রাইটার। After studying the writings of William Shakespeare, we can understand the English culture, we can understand the Englishness in literature, and we can understand this through the writings of William Shakespeare. That is the one perspective. The existence of an alternative pictures the revolutionary poet whose plays about the disposition of unjust ruler was staged across Europe in cities seething with revolutionary energy was not permissible. Okay. William Shakespeare writing inspired English culture. At the same time, William Shakespeare's play, Macbeth, Hamlet, King Lear, Othello, such kind of the murder and this tragedy were the greatest tragedies of William Shakespeare. এই ট্র্যাজেডি গুলোতে যখন একজন রাজাকে আরেকজন রাজাকে হত্যা করার ঘটনা দেখে ইউরোপের অন্য দেশগুলোর মধ্যেও এরকম কিং কে হত্যা করার এবং রিভলিউশনের যে অ্যাটিটিউড ছড়িয়ে পড়েছিল, that was not permissible according to Jawaharlal Nehru's speech. Okay, so observing William Shakespeare's drama at that time in Renaissance period, in the Elizabethan period, William Shakespeare drama was staged all over the Europe, inspired by the drama. Actually, at that time, literature portrayed the life picture. Literature portrayed the nation's culture and picture. Okay, so all over the Europe, the William Shakespeare drama was staged. Dramas were staged, and observing the drama, the European countries, they were trying to have revolution and try to put against the kings and the rulers. And that was created bloodshed all over the Europe. Jawaharlal Nehru said that is permissible. That is not permissible. Okay. So he has contrast this. That means which of these two Englands came to India? So British or England, they exported William Shakespeare in India. In William Shakespeare's writing, we have had two attitudes: Englishness, the great English writer, and another, the bloodshed in European dramas. Okay, so Jawaharlal Nehru asks which one we have got in India by William Shakespeare. The England of Shakespeare, Milton of notable speech, writing and brave deed of the political revolution and the struggle for freedom of science and the technological progress, or the England of the savage penal code. So, England broad penal code, DC, District Commissioner, eh, that was brought by England in Indian subcontinent. The brutal behavior, intense feudalism, যে সামন্ত প্রথা, যে নীল চাষ, ওকে, এই যে ফিউডালিজম, এই ফিউডালিজম প্যানাল কোড, তার মানে যে মানুষ অন্যায় করলে তাকে বিচার করে তাকে যে একটা শাস্তি দিতে হবে, এই যে প্যানাল কোড, এই সিস্টেমটাও ইংলিশরা ইন্ডিয়াতে নিয়ে আসছে। Brutal behavior, if anybody could betray with the British government, he was punished severely, and also the feudalism. So which England came to India? That was a question asked by Jawaharlal Nehru. For there were two Englands, just as the every country has, are these two aspects of national character and civilization. Okay, so that Jawaharlal Nehru was asked. So men like Macaulay, liberal intellectuals with a genuine belief in the superiority of their own cultures and the vision of the world, involved strict hierarchies based on class, race, and color, were also engaging in comparison. So such kind of, so you may ask that, so why, how it is related to comparative literature? That is such kind of liberal intellectuals, Macaulay's comment, genuine belief, superiority of their culture and language, hierarchies, cultural heritage. Okay, that are the aspects of comparative literature. Okay, that is, so the problem that was inevitably compared negativity. Some literatures were worth less than the others. Some were unique in having universal importance, and the others could be disregarded as the primitive and banal. Okay, so that is the question regarding comparative literature, and why. And for this reason, we have reading or studying the history of this literary past. The question of the universal value of an author or an work was the fundamental to this colonist viewpoint. The question of the universal value, for it enabled claims to be made that set works apart from all other consideration, arguing that a writer such as Shakespeare, for example, was a higher plane than almost anyone else. So that attitude can be compared in comparative literature. Shakespeare, সবচেয়ে greatest writer, আর অন্য কেউ না, এই ধরনের অ্যাটিটিউডটাকেও তুলনা করবে এই কম্পারেটিভ লিটারেচারে। The basis of the claims of universality painted as they will do to argue for some kind of common transcultural sharing of emotional experience and disregarded the vicissitudes of the literary history. So the fact that Ben Jonson was considered to be the greater writer than Shakespeare by his contemporaries and by the subsequent generation or well. Okay, so whenever Shakespeare, it was claimed that Ben Jonson was the greatest writer, was greater than William Shakespeare in merit of literature. But England didn't export Ben Jonson to India, but they exported William Shakespeare. Okay? So by the time Shakespeare was being exported to India and the other colonies in the mid-19th century, and his compatriots regarded his universal greatness as a matter of fact. যদি উইলিয়াম শেক্সপিয়ারের জায়গায় বেন জনসনকে যদি এই বাইরের দেশগুলোতে আনা হতো, তাহলে হয়তো বেন জনসন উইলিয়াম শেক্সপিয়ারকে ছাড়িয়ে যেত। That was the claim in case of comparative literature. So discovering Shakespeare that had gone through the 18th century was disregarded completely. Okay, so cultural colonialism, we have talked about that, about such kind of literary colonialism and cultural comparatism. Cultural colonialism was also a form of comparative literature. In that, writers were imported by the colonial groups. Okay, we have talked about that. That is, their culture is rich and other culture is uh, um, not rich. Okay, so that is in comparative literature that will also be good. In 1976, for example, C.L. Wren gave the presidential address in the Modern Humanities Research Association in Chicago, and then again in London 2 weeks later, entitled The Idea of Comparative Literature, in which he suggested that clearly fundamental difference in pattern of thinking among the peoples must impose relatively narrow limits. Actually, every people's thinking will be different. One person and one nation will be thinking differently about the others and about themselves. That is very good. An African language, for example, is incompatible with the European one for the just approaches in comparative literature study. Okay, so European and Asian, that would be a comparison. So this CL then he put that comment that, yeah, of course, every perspective from their own perspectives will be different. Even Sanskrit, though itself in Indo-European language, along with the Indo-European ramification, presents a pattern of thought which renders any short of literary translation of every limited value. Okay, so he said, C.L. Wren, he gave this lecture on comparative literature. He said that yes, he is a liberal thinker, just like he is not extreme nationalist poet died Macmillan and Switzerland. So Sell said that yes, every nation will have the literature and language. So they have their value they have their own value according to their judgment. But their judgment cannot be welcomed by the other people. Okay. So that is the position. He goes on to say, that means C.L. Wren goes on to say that a comparative study of Paradise Lost and the Ramayana, that can be happen. Paradise Lost, secondary epic. Ramayana, primary epic. Why? Because Ramayana oral tradition. John Milton's Paradise Lost also oral tradition, primary epic, sorry. For example, can also discuss parallels and differences in subject matter and treatment at the expense of the poetry, and suggests that this is inevitable because of the different nature of Sanskrit through thought and feeling. হ্যাঁ, তাহলে প্যারাডাইস লস্ট এবং রামায়ণের সাথে তুলনা হবে কেন? দুই উপমহাদেশে লেখা, মহাদেশে লেখা, দুই ভাষায় লেখা। শুধু তাই না, তাদের thought এবং ফিলিংও আলাদা। So this aspect can be compared in comparative literature. The only proper object of the study of comparative, he argues, is European language, medieval or modern. Okay, so he said, according to C.L. Wren, he said that, yeah, this language, European languages, medieval language, and modern language can be compared. So comparative literature is the field that examines literature and the cultural expression across various boundaries, including language, nationality, geography, academic discipline. It seeks to understand cultures from the within and analyzing language and the artistic tradition. Such like the study of international relations focuses on understanding different nations and their interactions. Nations and their interactions, while most commonly applied to work of different languages, comparative literature can also be used to analyze works of the same language that originate from the different nations and cultures where that the language are spoken. So the interdisciplinary nature of comparative literature allows for a broad scope of inquiry, encompassing the relationship between literature and the other aspects of human activity, such as history, politics, philosophy, art, and science, Unlike the other forms of literary study, comparative literature emphasizes the interdisciplinary analysis of social and the cultural production, okay, within various contexts, including economics, political dynamics, cultural movements, historical shifts, religious differences, urban environments, international relations, public policy, scientific advancement. Everything can be compared in comparative literature. Okay. So the field of comparative literature emerged in the 18th century, influenced by the European movements away from the literary neoclassicism towards the primitivist stance. The movement locked the uncivilized nations of the source of. So that is, and in this year, James Macpherson, a Scottish schoolmaster who claimed that to discover the translated ancient Gaelic poetry, Macpherson work known as the Ocean was a collection of epic poems attributed to a legendary bird named Ocean, son of Fionn Mac. So that is the comparative literature. So comparative literature is interdisciplinary field that examines literary and cultural expression across various boundaries, including language, nationality, and academic disciplines. Okay, so that is the history and the definition of comparative literature in brief. Okay, so